For job hunters or changers, the headlines at the moment are scary and redundancies are leaving people low on confidence.
In this episode, we speak to career coach Hannah about how to start getting unstuck in your career if that's you.
Plus, whether we're putting too much pressure on finding a dream career or we should just aim for good enough.
Thank you so much, Hannah, for joining us. I think to get started, I'd love to talk a little bit about the kind of environment that we're in at the moment, which is that we're seeing a lot of waves of redundancies. It's a really tough time actually out there. And I saw a headline this morning saying that loads of graduate jobs are reducing at the moment. I think a lot of employers seem to be quite worried about the general economy. So for clients that come to you and that are feeling really worried and stuck with where they are in their career, where do you begin?
I think it's a really hot topic at the moment, and so many people that I work with and prospective clients that come to me are very anxious about the economy, headlines, etc. One thing that I always try and encourage them to do is try not to get too bogged down on the macro side of things. Because I think when you look at it from a big picture, it can feel quite scary, quite unnerving. But people have to remember that they as an individual are only looking for one job. They're only looking for one opportunity, that one networking opportunity that pays off, that one job offer. So even though things might be quite scary when you look at the big picture, I think it's much more useful to focus on what you can control. And there are a lot of things in a job search which are out of your control, but there's also so much that is within your control. So for me, it's all about empowering them and making them realize, or helping them realize what it is that they can control and what they want, and taking all the steps to make it happen.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense, actually. You can get so overwhelmed by the big picture. But when you say those things that like we can control as individuals, what sorts of things are those?
So I think there's a few different things. The first thing is being really clear on what you want, which might sound obvious. But a lot of people, when they sort of slip into that desperate job seeker mode, they can get a little bit apply anywhere and everywhere. There's a real trend of people doing quick click applications. They think it's a numbers game. They think the more jobs I apply to, the better my odds are. What you will often find is that the more jobs you apply to, just the more rejections or not hearing back you will get. So I really encourage clients to take a more focused approach to job searching. The first step is definitely working out what it is you ideally want. So it's important to know ourselves well, to know our strengths, to know our values, to know our skill set, and just to be clear on what we're looking for, what we're willing to compromise on, what we're not willing to compromise on. But I generally think people can sometimes compromise a little bit too soon. Just going back to the sort of scattergun approach, it is helpful to have focus. It is not, it's not about being really specific or really niche and only targeting, for example, one company, but having a focus and being clear on what your ideal role or what your ideal employer looks like is really, really useful to give you focus. And the last thing I would just say, which I could talk about all day, is networking. I'm super passionate about networking. I think that we often have this image in our heads of it being a bit of an old boys club. It's about going to corporate events and schmoozing and sucking up to people. Really, networking can be so much more personalized and powerful than that. And for me, it's all about building meaningful connections, having interesting conversations. And I just think we are often quite nervous to harness the power of networking, but it's amazing the opportunities it can give us, not just for jobs, but even just to help us work out what type of roles we do actually want to do.
Yeah, I love that actually. And I think I have definitely had to embrace the power and art of networking since I started working for myself. But for people that maybe are new to networking and haven't really had to get into it before and maybe feel like it's a bit overwhelming or a bit daunting, what kind of advice do you have for starting out? Because I think for a lot of people, the idea of like, okay, send a message to someone or like you say, go to an event kind of scares people off.
Totally. And that is completely normal. And the majority of people actually feel like that. So the first thing I would say is you're not alone. It can feel really intimidating, but it is the type of thing that gets easier with practice. You will become better at networking through giving it a go, through practicing. There are lots of different types of networking, and there's not one that is necessarily better than another.
Yeah.
I think events can be useful to expose yourself to different industries, to learn more about things. Sometimes it's harder actually at an event to actually build a more meaningful connection. Where the opportunity often lies is in the follow-up. So if you attend a big event, maybe there's panelists or you have a quick conversation with someone, people are often quite keen on the event, but very few people follow up effectively. So you can add people on LinkedIn, tell them specifically what you enjoyed hearing about, what you learned, what you enjoyed from the event. And then if things go well, you can ask for a follow-up. So maybe a follow-up quick virtual coffee, a 20-minute phone call, things like that. The other thing that I would say is there's a really underutilized strategy of contacting people online. So LinkedIn is an amazing platform to connect and meet people. I think we're often very concerned with how our profile looks and kind of, it's a bit like CVs. People like tweaking, they like buzzwords, but actually it's much more around how you use it to connect and have conversations. So yes, your profile needs to be good enough. It needs to have a decent photo. It doesn't need to be professional, just a clear, approachable headshot. But yeah, it's that outreach and that finding interesting people to talk to. And again, it's something that I could talk a lot about, but my number one tip for networking on LinkedIn is try and focus on curiosity and learning rather than job searching.
Yeah.
It's very easy to just get on LinkedIn and add people and sort of spam them with your CV and say, let me know if you're hiring, let me know if you've got any jobs I'd be suitable for. That's not very engaging and often puts people off. Whereas if you approach it from a place of genuine interest and genuinely wanting to learn about people's stories, wanting to learn about people's experiences of working there, it just leads to a lot more conducive conversations that are a bit more real, a bit more authentic, and also take the pressure off, because that is a big challenge in job search. It's the pressure you put on yourself and the pressure that you sometimes put on potential connections.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And actually, I think LinkedIn is one of those places that a lot of people maybe do neglect a little bit and don't really harness the power of. So I think that's so helpful thinking about it from a networking perspective. And I like that idea of curiosity.
I think curiosity is such a underrated quality, and it's becoming more prominent now. Actually, a lot of recruiters specifically look for that quality in both graduates and experienced hires that they're looking to bring in. So it's about being genuinely interested, genuinely wanting to learn, not just kind of what can I get from it. There's a whole chapter on networking in my book that I talk a lot about, because there are so many different elements to it and there are so many different ways you can approach it. So yeah,
not one size fits all.
Exactly. And I think I'm particularly passionate about it because I used to feel how a lot of people feel. I used to dread it. I used to feel awkward. I used to think that I had to, be someone else, almost put on this mask. And now the type of networking that I do is so much more enjoyable. And I want other people to understand that networking can be enjoyable.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm echo that. I think I definitely didn't used to enjoy it, but now it's something that I kind of sometimes aren't always keen to jump into, but when I do it and I kind of commit to it, I do really enjoy it. And you do meet some amazing people, so it's great.
It can take energy, it can take effort, but the things that you can learn and gain from it are incredible.
Definitely. And I mean, one thing that you talk about on your website as well is high potential and this idea of, working with high potential individuals. But do you often find that you come across clients or people that are interested in looking outside their career, exploring their career, but that can't see their own potential? And if so, how do you help somebody to see that themselves?
So the quick answer is yes, definitely. And I was in two minds about whether to actually use the word high potential in describing the type of people that I work with, because I think a lot of them wouldn't necessarily count themselves as high potential. For me, one of the biggest qualities of people that I seek to work with, it's all about attitude. For me, having confidence already is not necessarily a prerequisite, because confidence can be developed. Confidence is a skill that we can all work on, and we can take steps to build our own confidence. But I think you have to have the right motivation. So you might not necessarily feel already like you are high potential or high performing or anything like that. You might very well be suffering from imposter syndrome, lack of confidence, etc., but you have to have the want to do more, the want to do better, even if there is that kind of nagging self-critic in the back of your head.
Yeah. And I mean, how do we as individuals, if we're questioning whether we do have that, are there any ways that we can figure it out if we maybe have got that untapped or unrealized potential?
I honestly believe everyone has untapped potential, which might sound a bit cheesy, but I really think that everyone's in process. Cheesy, but your career is a journey.
Yeah.
And everyone can take steps to get more from their career. Everyone can improve, everyone can get better. But it is also about enjoying it and enjoying the process. It's not just about ruthlessly trying to get better for the sake of it.
Yeah.
For me personally, I've really learned to try and enjoy the process and enjoy the learning and the growth as I'm going, because I definitely had a habit at the start of my career of always thinking, oh, when I get this, then I'll feel like I've made it, or when I reach this level, then I'll really feel like I'm there.
Yeah.
And I still don't feel like that, and I don't think I ever will, because I want to keep moving forward. I want to keep growing. So
I think that's actually kind of a better point that you just made about that fact that you maybe never feel like you're there. And I guess that feeling of, when I reach X, I'll be happy or I'll be satisfied, brings me to another question, which is this idea of, there's a lot of pressure, I think, nowadays for your job to be perfect or to be your dream career and to find something that you love, that quote that's like, find a job you love and you'll never work a day in your life, all of that stuff. I'd love to know, from your perspective, do you think that there is too much pressure that we're putting on for our work to be that all-encompassing, fulfilling, no bad days thing? And actually, is sometimes like there a level of good enough that we can strive for that is okay?
I definitely think there is, or there can be, too much pressure that we put on ourselves. I think that's very common across a lot of things, whether it comes to relationships, money, career, family. We often, particularly women, are very good at putting pressure on ourselves. I would say that you can't expect your career to give you everything, and our lives are multifaceted and we often get different things from different parts of it. So absolutely putting too much pressure on your career to be perfect, which doesn't exist, can not be helpful. However, I also think that sometimes we can use that as a bit of an excuse to stay stuck and to stay in a job that we're not happy with. So like with most things, it's a balance. No career is perfect. No one likes their job every day. However, I've heard clients telling themselves messages like that before to justify staying somewhere where they are genuinely unhappy. So I think it's about not pressure, but almost the way I see it is when we see other people who have amazing careers that we are perhaps a little bit envious of, or we think other people have made it, try and use that for inspiration rather than negative comparison.
Yeah.
I think there is so much to be learned from admiring other people's careers and seeing other people who have created careers that they're really happy with or that work for them. And there's always things that we can learn, things that we can put into practice to get closer. But it's absolutely not about beating yourself up, putting pressure on the situation, because that's not very motivating at all.
Yeah. How do we know, or how can we figure out, though, if we are making excuses and just putting up with something? Because I think sometimes with the challenge is the idea of, well, what if something else? What if I move, I try something different? And what if that also doesn't tick the boxes? And then I've maybe given up the stability or the comfort. How can we start to figure that out? Because I think a lot of people, that safety is almost a blanket.
Yeah, it is tricky. It is tricky figuring it out, and it often doesn't happen overnight. I think trying to have an honest conversation with yourself and really identifying what is important to you in your career, because different things are important to different people. Some people really value stability, other people really value financial reward, other people really value flexibility and freedom. And again, there's no right or wrong.
Yeah.
So being really clear on what your motivators are, what your drivers are, what you want your career to give you is a really helpful starting point. I definitely think the more you can increase your own self-awareness of what you want, what you want your career to give you is super important, whether that is working with a coach or a mentor, talking it through with a friend. I'm a massive fan of journaling and keeping a diary. I think it's such a simple, free way of getting to know yourself a little bit better and being honest and open with yourself about your fears, because fears are natural and fears are there ultimately to keep you safe. And sometimes pushing away those fears or ignoring those fears or fighting those fears doesn't actually help, whereas actually acknowledging them, listening to them and thinking, is this a rational fear? And does this mean that I do want to stay where I am, or am I just using it as an excuse? Those are not simple answers, but I definitely think by being honest with yourself, by reflecting externally, either with a person or out on paper, can help give you a little bit more clarity and help you learn to trust your own judgment a little bit better.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. And I think something else you touched on there as well was comparison, looking at other people's careers. And I just wondered if if this is something that you see happen a lot, where people do spend a lot of time looking at other people's careers and feeling bad about themselves, or, why has that person achieved all of this stuff? But also, B, if that is the case, is there a way that we can change our perspective and use that comparison potentially for, like you say, a better course or motivation?
Yeah, so it's something that I am very interested in. I've written a blog about it quite recently because I think it is a very natural human quality. Humans have survived and evolved to compare, and we're naturally social creatures. We look around us, we compare. So I think the first thing is recognize that it's normal, it's natural, and it in itself is not something you should beat yourself up about. However, it's not always the most useful or accurate way to benchmark yourself for a few reasons. One, we're always comparing our internal fears, doubts, insecurities with other people's shiny, curated external. We only ever see what people want to present, whether it's a shiny reel on Instagram or whether it's someone's promotion or success. It's very easy to choose a lot of what we show, whereas all the failures and mistakes and the self-doubt that often people have inside themselves, we bury that and we don't show it. So it's not accurate. And the other thing is, you're not always comparing yourself to necessarily the right type of people anyway. You could compare you could choose to hang around with people that are total losers, who don't want to, don't have any ambition, don't really care about themselves or other people or anything. And so compared to them, you might think, oh, great, I'm doing really well. You might hang out with people who are incredibly ambitious, incredibly successful, incredibly privileged and incredibly lucky, and compare yourself to them and think, oh, I'm not doing so well. But actually, you are for yourself. So I think ultimately it's an appealing habit. It's something that we often want to do, but it's not necessarily helpful or useful. So I would say try and notice and recognize when you do it, and start to try and reshift your focus internally. You think, well, actually, what do I want? Because it's very easy not only to negatively compare yourself, but even to let other people's goals shape your own. We think, oh, they've got this money, they've got this car, that must be what I want to aim for. And ultimately, what we all want is very different. And it's not easy. It's very natural to be influenced by other people's expectations. But the more we can tap into our own and really know our values, our drivers, what we want, the more you will achieve success, but what success means for you.
Yeah, that's so true. I think that getting clear on what success means for you, it's not easy, but actually once you can do that, it makes so much of the other stuff easier.
Yeah.
And that noise of comparison that so often is present, like you say, not only in career, but in like money and in like our social lives and in work, like it can start to quieten down a bit when we're really clear on what we want.
Yeah.
I think just to kind of talk about a slightly different topic in the world of work, there's a lot of conversation at the moment about the development of AI. And I think there's a lot of people that I'm seeing a bit concerned about their careers and, you know, future of work and what that might look like. I'm interested to know, is it something that you think we should be concerned about as somebody that works in career space? But also, are there things that we can do to, I guess, future-proof ourselves and our skills from AI and our jobs being taken over by robots?
It's definitely sensible to be aware of it because it is a hot topic and it's a hot topic for a reason. It's something that I talk about with my husband quite a lot because he works in tech and he knows quite a lot about it and I'm not particularly techy. I think that it's useful, you know, you can view it as an opportunity or you can view it as a challenge. And ultimately, there's so much that we don't know. We don't know how AI is going to develop and exactly what it's going to look like in 5, 10, 20 years' time. So I definitely don't think it's helpful to spend lots of time worrying about it without taking any action. But future-proofing your career is always something that is a useful thing to do. And the things that I think are helpful are, again, knowing the value that you bring, knowing the value that you add, knowing your strengths, because even if the context in which you apply them vastly changes, the employer that you work for might change, the clients that you maybe serve might alter. As long as you understand your fundamental strengths or the value that you can offer to clients or to an employer, then that can evolve and change as technology changes as well. Of course, some jobs are going to change and evolve, and we just don't know. But I think that by focusing on your own professional and personal development is a useful way to stay agile and give yourself the best opportunities in the future.
Yeah. And I think that's really reassuring that there are always things we can do. And I think ultimately as well, the landscape of work has always changed. And that, you know, I guess 20 years ago, we didn't have computer technology that we have today. And so there's probably the same fears about computers taking over our jobs. And there will always be a need for people to do certain things. So that kind of focusing on what we can do is really helpful. And for anybody that's listening and actually, you know, thinking, I want to level up, I know I need to build some of my skills, but again, where do I begin?
Yeah.
Are there any good starting points or kind of resources, ideas for people that are a bit unsure how to make themselves, I guess, more marketable or a better prospect?
Yeah. So one thing that I would say is be aware of your personal brand. And personal brand is a concept that I really resisted when I set up my own business. It felt a little bit like networking, a little bit fake, a little bit like you had to almost create a persona or create an identity that wasn't really you to kind of sell to people. And what I have discovered is that personal brand is really just a way of saying the impression that you give, the impression that you create. And so I think, again, that being aware of yourself, being aware of your drivers, your values, your motivators, who you really are and the type of person that you want to be is so useful. To develop your personal brand, there's lots of different things that you can do. One thing is be a bit more visible, either internally at work, be a bit more visible online, whether it's writing blogs, creating content, interacting with other people online, and try and find a way to do it that feels real and natural and like yourself rather than a kind of act that you have to personify and put a lot of effort into doing. Going back to thinking about those who almost want more from their career but don't know where to start. Again, that is one of the most common things I hear, not knowing where to start. And I think what holds us back is our preference for perfection
Yeah.
and our want to know the exact roadmap before we start. So the biggest advice that I would give for people who don't know where to start is just to start somewhere, because you are inevitably going to make some wrong moves, hit some dead ends, explore some options that actually aren't that interesting. Maybe even your next career move won't be the ideal one and you might go on to do something else. But not knowing for sure the next perfect move to make is not a reason to do nothing. So I would say things that I would do are self-reflect. So write down what you enjoy, what you're good at, what skills you have. Write down your career preferences and deal breakers. So what you ideally want from your career and the kind of nice to haves and the must haves, and knowing the difference between those. And I think the other thing I would say is just talk to as many people as possible. And that sounds like really simple advice, but it's so important. Network more online, network more in person. Speak to friends and family. If there are any employers or roles that you're curious about, if you want to learn more about what being a buyer is, or what working in marketing is like, or what working in technology is like, try and talk to people doing it without pressure to be looking for a job. Actually have those curious conversations and keep going, take small steps. I think there's a lot of pressure to get a perfect job overnight, but these things do take time. The big thing for me is that progress and making those small steps forward, exploring options, and the momentum will come from that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And you touched on it there and I kind of laughed because I was like, yeah, that is 100% true about that kind of desire for perfect before starting. Is that something that you think is a particularly female trait? Or is it something that generally a lot of people tend to find? Because I'm just thinking about myself and my girlfriends particularly, who are all so like just like that.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And I think 5-10 years ago, I would have said definitely yes, because my experience as a female is what I know most about. And I would agree, my friends and I are very open with each other and we talk quite a lot about sort of accidentally trying to be perfect or fear of failure and things like that. However, I have worked in recent years with a lot of male clients, and in them I have definitely seen more of that than I was aware of. So I don't know is the honest answer, but I definitely think it can, that kind of fear of failure and want for perfection and scared of getting it wrong definitely can apply to both genders.
And I mean, this is almost an impossible question, but do you think there is a way, or are there any kind of tangible things we can do to deal with that fear of failure? Because I think in career particularly, it can really hold us back. And I know, again, from my own experience, it's one of the things that I've had to deal with a lot is trying to, not let it stop me from pursuing things that I wanted to do. So is there anything kind of just, that if that is something that's in the back of your mind that people can use, or a tool or somewhere to begin with trying to handle that?
I think that you're absolutely right. Fear of failure is such a barrier for progress. I would say a couple of things. One is try and nudge your comfort zone. It's hard. It's called your comfort zone for a reason, but the more proactive steps we can take to slowly stretch our comfort zone, the better. This might be more networking. It might be speaking up more in team meetings at work. It might be talking to a stranger on the tube. It might be taking cold showers. These sound small things, but the more small ways that we can find to nudge our comfort zone, the braver we become. I think there's a general thought that we need to feel brave first, but actually often by trying new things, taking new steps, we feel braver and less afraid of failure in the process. Linked to that, I would say try and create almost safe opportunities for failure. Networking is one of those things that can often feel quite scary, quite overwhelming. We might get ignored on LinkedIn. We might have an awkward conversation with someone where we ask a silly question. We might say something that we believe is a bit of a failure, but it's not really career ending.
Yeah.
Especially when we're doing it sort of one-to-one, we're not doing it associated with our work. It's a fairly safe way to fail. So I would say try and create specific opportunities for failure. And the last thing that I would say is reflect on those failures afterwards and recognize what you learn from each of them. We all learn from mistakes. Again, it's cliche, but you really do learn more from getting things wrong. And listen to the podcast, How to Fail. It's one of my favorite and it always makes me feel better about failures.
Amazing. I love that idea of like stretching your comfort zone, because I definitely had never thought of it like that. But I often think we think of things so binary, and it's like you either have to be in it or you have to be outside of it. And actually just pushing those boundaries is a much nicer way to think of getting a little bit further outside it. But thank you so much, Hannah. This has been eye-opening, and I think a lot of people are going to take away a load of information from this. For anybody that wants to find out more, you mentioned your book. Where can we find you? What should we read?
So there are a few different options. So I would definitely encourage anyone listening to this to connect with me on LinkedIn. As you know, I'm a big fan of that. Personalize your invitation if you can, rather than just quick click adding. But yeah, I post a lot of job search and career content on LinkedIn. People can also find out more about my coaching programs on my website. So that's hannahsalton.co.uk. And my book, which is aimed at graduates, but it has a lot of general career content, is available on Amazon. So it's called Graduate Careers Uncovered, Tools and Insights from a Former Recruiter to Demystify Your Job Search. So a bit of a mouthful.
Amazing. We'll put all of those links into the show notes below so everybody can find you. But thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's been great.